Hello there everyone, I am making videos again. Yes siree, but I'm not going to make any Warhammer videos for a little bit. I'm going to make some historical ones. I've been listening to a lecture series about the British Empire, and I'm inspired to make some videos about it. To start off with, I was just intending on reading a poem, and then I realised that the poem would need historical context beforehand. And eventually it's led to me wanting to tell you the whole story of the 2 Opium Wars. So, here it goes. It's kind of the situation that led to the event that the poem is about. So, it's all good. Yeah, it's the only way to do it, really. So, thank you, and bear with me before I get started on the Warhammer videos again. This war was fought on both sides. The First Opium War, this is, by empires with huge egos who consider themselves supreme over the other. And on one side we have the British Empire, post-industrial revolution, and nearly at the height of its naval control of the high seas, starting to favour free trade. On the other side we have the Qing dynasty of China, an imperial dynasty of the Manchus. And this is a closed and bureaucratic society that has been sealed off from the social changes and political changes in the rest of the world of the 19th century. But it's important to note that the chauvinism that both of these sides had for their own culture and DNA, I guess, is shown in different ways in either society. Britain at the minute is enriching itself and growing its kind of power and prestige by trading with lots of different nations. At this point, they never planned to conquer China, perhaps because it's so obviously capable of governing itself, so they couldn't kind of morally rationalize it. But they're certainly in favour of having as much trade as possible with them, and Chinese products are actually kind of all the rage in Britain. In return, the Chinese want to be as protectionist as possible, and they want to allow the kind of minimum amount of contact with these barbarian pig dogs as possible. So they're only allowing these British to trade at one port called Canton, and dealing with one specific guild of merchants called the Hong. And as a result, I suppose, Western goods haven't really caught on in China, although as you'll find out later, there's a lot of things that they could be kind of purchasing from the Westerners that would help them out, you know. We're having an industrial revolution at this point, so there's certainly products that would be very useful for the Chinese, but it's a kind of a cultural thing. It's a bit like the dwarves in Warhammer. They like their way of life. They don't feel like they really need anything extra to help them. And sometimes that can hold them back. This is not to knock the Chinese's capacity for innovation, by the way, because as we know, they invented gunpowder and a lot of other stuff. I think the stirrup was started over there as well. The earliest surviving chemical formula of gunpowder dates to 1044 in the form of the military manual Wujing Zongyao, also known in English as the Complete Essentials for the Military Classics, which contains a collection of factoids on Chinese weaponry. The Wujing Zongyao served as a repository of antiquated or fanciful weaponry, and this applied to gunpowder as well, which suggests that it had already been weaponized long before the invention of what today would be considered conventional firearms. These numerous types of gunpowder weapons, styling various names such as the Flying Incendiary Club for Subjugating Demons, or the Clatrop Fireball, the 10,000 Fire Flying Sand Magic Bomb, the Big Bee's Nest, the Burning Heaven Fierce Fire Unstoppable Bomb, the Fire Bricks, which released Flying Swallows, Flying Rats, Firebirds, and Fire Oxen, eventually gave way and coalesced into a smaller number of dominant types, notably gunpowder arrows, bombs, and guns. This is probably because some weapons were deemed too onerous or ineffective to deploy. That experimental phase sounds a lot of fun, though. I mean, perhaps the fact that they've given them such wacky names shows you how, in that experimental phase they had before it kind of congealed into the idea of guns, bombs, and fire arrows, was it? Yeah. Perhaps that shows you how little people understood of what the fuck was actually happening, so they just named it after demons and stuff. Apart from this, like, cabal of people that were actually able to make them, of course. I'm sure they knew what was going on. But anyway, as much as we should respect the history of China and its contribution to the world, right now it's kind of getting left behind, and it's become kind of bigoted as a civilization towards, like, foreign influence. And you can see why that has become a thing, but it's nonetheless a fact. So yeah, they're still fighting with, like, a lot of swords and bows and arrows and stuff, and have pretty pathetic ships in comparison to the British Empire, but they still don't really want to trade with them on a mass scale. Little side note as well, something I found interesting is that they have like a contingent of Mongol cavalry. So, the British are only allowed to trade in this one port, and as well as that, with this one guild of merchants called the Hong, which are taxed heavily by the Chinese government as well. And additionally, they have to pay the local authorities several bribes for the privilege of trading there. From studying this period, it seems like China had a bit of a problem in this kind of bureaucratic overclass that it has of corruption and self-interest for these officials that are running local governments. So while these British merchants are making extremely costly trades here, they are actually getting quite a lot of payoff from it, because the demand in Britain and the British territories for Chinese goods is extremely high and keeps growing. Most notably, can you guess? It's tea, everyone. Tea is becoming a kind of cornerstone of the British economy. It's become extremely popular now, and has become kind of like a basic good, and perhaps even a human right, one would say. 1 year, apparently, the import tax on tea made the government £4 million, which obviously in money back then was like an extremely huge amount. I've heard it was 10% of the economy or something at one point, which sounds crazy. I just looked that up and it is true. By 1813, import duty on tea accounted for 10% of the British government's entire revenue. Tea imports grew from practically nothing in the early 1700s to over £30 million per year a century later. Tea was already a part of our blood. It always had been. We just found that out when we founded the East India Company. But anyway, speaking of the East India Company, they had been increasing their influence in India for quite a while now. I've got a map that I'll throw up on the screen here. And we had claimed quite a lot of territory in India by this time. Something that you can get in India, apart from that, is opium. And we grew a lot of opium there. And this became the product that we used to break the Chinese market, so to speak. Not all the wonders of Western invention that had happened since the Industrial Revolution. Not all of that shit. Not the amazing new weapons that we had come up with that would, revolutionize China's military. And particularly their fucking navy, which is what needed revolutionizing the most. Not all of that. Opium ended up being the product that broke the market. So I guess that shows you need a chemical addiction to actually be overriding the Chinese desire for protectionism. Perhaps that is stronger than logic. And I mean, if the chemical addiction of any drug is stronger than logic, then it's going to be opium. For anyone that doesn't know this, everyone probably knows this, but opium is what you make heroin out of, that comes from poppies. It is extremely addictive. But it was on sale freely in pharmacies and stuff in London and other places in the British Empire as a medicine, actually, as a kind of relaxant and a painkiller as well. The medicine laudanum was the form that it was sold in the UK, I think. And what's interesting is that, as was mentioned in this lecture series that inspired me to make this video, there is a book called Confessions of a British Opium Eater, and this was published in 1821 by a guy called Thomas de Quincey, was it? And it's about how he gradually descends into opium addiction from just buying it once from a chemist as a medicine. As originally published, de Quincey's account was organised into two parts. Part 1 begins with a notice to the reader to establish the narrative frame. I here present you, courteous reader, with the record of a remarkable period in my life, which is followed by the substance of Part 1, preliminary confessions devoted to the author's childhood and youth, and is concentrated upon the emotional and psychological factors that underlay the later opium experiences, especially the period in his late teens that de Quincey spent as a homeless runaway in Oxford Street in London at 1802 to end 1803. Part 2 is split into several sections, a relatively brief introduction and connecting passage followed by The Pleasures of Opium, which discusses the early and largely positive phase of the author's experience with the drug, from 1804 till 1812. It's quite interesting that he would describe it as a positive experience for that many years. Introduction to the Pains of Opium, which delivers a second instalment of autobiography, taking de Quincey from youth to maturity, and The Pains of Opium, which recounts the extreme of the author's opium experience up to that time, with insomnia, nightmares, frightening visions, and difficult physical symptoms. Another notice to the reader attempts to clarify the chronology of the whole. Though de Quincey was later criticised for giving too much attention to the pleasure of opium and not enough to the harsh negatives of the addiction, The Pains of Opium is in fact significantly longer than the pleasures. However, even when trying to convey darker truths, de Quincey's language can seem seduced by the compelling nature of the opium experience. The sense of space, and in the end the sense of time, were both powerfully affected. Buildings, landscapes, etc. were exhibited in proportions so vast as the bodily eye is not fitted to conceive. Space swelled and was amplified to an extent of unutterable affinity. This, however, did not disturb me so much as the vast expansion of time. I sometimes seemed to have lived for 70 or 100 years in one night, nay, sometimes had feelings representative of a millennium passed in that time, or, however, of a duration far beyond the limits of any human experience. Right, so that's a book for you if you would like to read it, and I think I'm going to at some point, because it seems like an incredibly interesting account to read, from like a highly educated and skilled writer that he seems to be, in the 1820s, addicted to smack. It's just a strange combination that I think would be very fun to read. So yes, while opium was readily available in our land, we didn't really have so much of a problem with it, and we didn't consider it as much of a menace as alcohol even. Gin was causing huge amount of deaths in Britain at the time. So the idea of opium being like a menace was actually pretty low-key, like not many people actually thought that. Alcohol was a more kind of obvious impact on society at that point. And I suppose gin being like famously extremely cheap, and this is post-industrial revolution, so it can be mass-produced. I can see how that could cause like a new wave of social problems, basically killing off the bottom IQ bracket. So this opium trade had actually began in 1773, and we'd got it down to a T by this point. We were growing the opium in our lands in the east of India, and then transporting the picked opium to an island for processing in the sea in between these two nations, and then transporting them to Canton to sell them. Now, the Chinese authorities had an even worse opinion of opium than the British authorities, and actually in 1729 they had released some anti-opium legislation to try and keep them under control, but they didn't have much of a problem with it then, because the good old Brits weren't flooding the markets with opium. like we do later. So when this first anti-opium edict was promulgated, the imports of opium into China was at 200 chests annually. And by the time the Chinese authorities reissued the prohibition in much starker terms in 1799, this is because of the British imports that this had become a problem, the figure had leaped to 4,500 chests, so most of these are British imports in the year 1800. And by 1835, there were 2 million opium addicts in China, mixing opium with tobacco and smoking it for relaxation and to get high. But of course, this legislation that was passed in 1800 was not actually effective in suppressing the addicts, and there was too many of them, basically, for it to work. And of course, the East India Company merchants that were selling the opium just used to bribe the Chinese local officials and sell through local mandarins, which would enrich themselves in the process. So the self-interest that I was talking about earlier coming into play here. Speaking of self-interest, there were voices within the British government and just high up in the British elite in general that criticised this flooding of the Chinese markets with opium. But basically it was making too much money for our economy to pass up, and we were always going to be trading with China to get the tea that we needed as a human right at this point. So there was no way of not trading with them, and we needed a product so that the money wouldn't just be flowing one way, if that makes sense. Now, the British had wanted to be expanding the trade in China for a long time, and there was an attempt in 1834 for a new trade deal to be formed. As part of this attempt, there was a kind of diplomatic meeting where Lord Napier was sent on behalf of Britain, and he went to meet with some local mandarins. Mandarin, by the way, is an official in any of the 9 top grades of the former Imperial Chinese Civil Service. So these are extremely powerful people, and as part of their extra perks and privileges that they get to exercise as extremely powerful people, as a part of the Chinese culture, they arrive 2 hours late for the meeting, which is supposedly a kind of a normal thing in Chinese culture, that the higher your rank is, former Chinese culture anyway, I'm sure they don't do this now, but the higher your rank was, the later you would appear to meetings and any kind of occasion where you're supposed to arrive at a certain time, you would arrive later. And Napier, after being forced to wait in the heat for this long, which I wonder if that was a deliberate kind of act to subject the barbarian to something that would cow him, perhaps. I would assume that normally when Chinese officials met each other, the lower ranking one would be provided with somewhere nice to sit and have drinks and some company, some prostitutes or something, maybe, to, like, entertain him for the hours before these, like, high-ranking people arrive. You know what I mean? I don't think it would be punishing, normally. But this guy was just kind of waiting in the heat and getting more and more flustered and annoyed because he didn't know about this part of Chinese culture. In Britain, if you're supposed to meet at a certain time, you meet at a certain time, and you're fucking shoddy if you're late. And, of course, he didn't expect this off high-ranking officials and didn't know about this kind of cultural background here. So when they arrived, he berated them for being late and was very angry at them. And the Chinese received this insult impassively, rather. Not showing any sign that they had been deeply offended, but they were in fact incredibly offended and just felt like this is another example of how these just stupid barbarians can't be reasoned with or controlled. And this shows a conceptual gulf between these two civilizations. It's the phrase that was used in this lecture series that I quite like. So needless to say, this trade deal was not formed. Here is a letter that was sent from a viceroy of China to the Hong guild regarding the English trying to get extra rights and privileges to their trading customs at the time. So this was sent in May 1834. The English chief says his company will come no more to Canton to barter his useless goods for our necessaries of life. Why the English have changed their system is not worth inquiring into. If the new chief displays awe and reverence and implicitly obeys the old laws, I will show compassion to him. If he tries to make changes, I and the other officials will throw him out. The English chief talks of hardships and injustices. He must know that it is our clemency that permits him to come here. What he imposes has long been settled and cannot be changed. Let the Hong merchant serve on him the attached list of old laws, that he may enjoin them to his new chief. Oppose not. 1. Barbarians may not stay the whole year in Canton, learning the prices of goods and making early purchases in the hope of increasing profits. 2. Originally, the barbarians were allowed to trade only with the Hong merchants. My predecessor Li allowed them to buy some insignificant things from outside them, but only under the surveillance of a linguist or comprador. 3. Barbarians may live only in the warehouses of the Hong merchants. Chinese must not forget the dignity of the empire and hire themselves out as servants to barbarians. 4. Barbarians cannot be carried about in sedan chairs. They may not race boats on the river. They must stay in their lodgings until their business is concluded, and then immediately leave. 5. Barbarians' females are forbidden to come. If they come, they will be forcibly expelled. 6. Barbarians may not hire natives to teach them Chinese. All their linguistic needs will be met by the linguists and the compradors. They may not present petitions at the city gate. These are the 6 essential rules that must be implicitly obeyed. They should also be instructed in the minor rules. Barbarians can be ruled only by misrule because of their inflexibility. They cannot be governed by the same law as Chinese because they do not know how to present themselves and their arguments appropriately. They should clearly know that when one of them causes death, only one of their own lives can atone for it. Do not let them say they were not warned. And behind this whole breakdown of relations between the British and the Chinese, the opium crisis in China is just gradually ratcheting up, and obviously there's more tensions since the imperial authorities have made opium illegal, and the trade continues to be blossoming, essentially. In 1838, the Chinese government tries to cut off all of the opium supply. The emperor was working with a high-up administrator called Lin to stamp out the rest of the trade in the country. Wholesalers were beginning to be beheaded for selling opium, and people accepting bribes from Westerners would be executed by strangulation. The addicts of opium were given 18 months to kick the habit, after which they would be killed. So a little bit of leniency there, which is quite surprising to see. Here is a letter that the Viceroy Lin sent to Her Majesty Queen Victoria. Your Majesty must immediately search out and throw to the bottom of the sea, and never again allow such a poison as opium to exist. You will be showing that you understand the principles of heaven by respectful obedience to our commands. Do not say that you have not been warned in time. On receiving this, your Majesty will be so good as to report to me immediately on the steps that you have taken in each of your ports. Now, as you can imagine, Queen Victoria didn't react too well to this, and this further contributed to a breakdown of relations. So war was becoming more and more inevitable at this point. And this is accelerated by the fact that, as I've said a few times before, both sides see themselves as superior, so none of them want to back down. Chinese soldiers, in fact, besieged the British merchants in Canton, who had been illegally selling opium, of course, until the Commissioner Charles Elliot ordered his men to hand over the opium. £2 million worth was destroyed in a swamp near Canton, and they got loads of servants to stamp it down until it was below the water level. So that very Chinese way of doing it. So that was the end of that. That would spoil all of the opium, the water getting into the boxes and stuff like that. Dirty water as well. These heavy restrictions, however, on the supply of opium, if you know what I mean, of course raises the price, and this is something that the American government found out when they tried to make alcohol illegal. As the addicts become more desperate, they will pay anything for their fix, and so, if anything, this kind of invigorated the East India Company to carry on the trade. So, when the trade persisted, Lin started pursuing the traders off and out of Canton, forcing them off the shore. So these traders had to take up residence in the ships just off the shore. There would always be some kind of a British naval presence near Canton, so that's where they had to go. While this was happening, in this same rack of ships somewhere, a group of drunken British sailors killed a Chinese peasant. And this could not have happened at a worse time, when tensions were extremely high. This guy, Lin, who's already on his kind of warpath, is absolutely enraged, and he demands that they be handed over so that a Chinese court can give the prosecution to the sailors. But the East India Company refuses, I guess not trusting the Chinese to understand, or, seeing them as morally inferior, basically, and thinking that they're going to do something brutal, which they will. Here is when China makes the final step and blockades all British trade. Here's where the fighting begins. Despite the numerous dissenting voices within the UK saying that the opium trade was immoral and going to war over it would be a disgrace, the economic factors were too much to pass up, and the certain degree of racial pride and glory of the empire was to be considered as well. The prestige was always wanting to be held up high, and so they never wanted to kind of kowtow to these foreign powers like this. The outbreak of war gave the British a chance to show the Chinese the bounties of their technology post-industrial revolution. 15 British ships bombarded Qinghai, which is a port on an island off the coast of China, and in this time they just completely decimated the city in 9 minutes. The British Navy was extremely experienced at this point, and from the 1820s would replaced the standard kind of cannonballs and chain shot and stuff like that you associate with the earlier kind of period, with exploding shells. And in this kind of period as well was when we were starting to introduce steam power into the Royal Navy. In fact, the Nemesis was the first British ocean-going iron warship, launched in 1839, which is when the First Opium War broke out, under Captain Richard Collinson and Captain William Hutchin Hall. The Chinese referred to her as the Devil Ship. So this was an ironclad ship that was 56 metres long and could carry 660 tons. That is the burthen, which is what that refers to. Powered by two 60-horsepower Forester engines. She was armed with two pivot-mounted 32-pounder and four 6-pounder guns and a rocket launcher, which is another kind of slightly new technology that's being introduced now. Kind of ironic that we're using rockets against the Chinese to kill them when they originally invented them to make fireworks with, surely. But I don't think they had this kind of rocket firepower on the other side. The steam and sail-powered ship was particularly effective in China because her shallow draft allowed her to travel into rivers to pursue and engage other vessels and targets. If you don't have a steam engine, travelling into rivers and other kind of narrow areas is really kind of risky and not really doable. especially with any amount of speed. But something that steam engines allow you to do is to go up places like that, where otherwise it would be extremely difficult. Rockets had been in use by the British Empire since 1805, after they'd been reverse engineered from rockets confiscated that were fired at us in India by the Mysore people. But anyway, in this town that was bombarded, it was decimated, the Chinese survivors fled, and the British Navy sailors occupied the town, looted it, and got roaring drunk on captured liquor. Britain was determined to access other ports and to get its compensation for the dumped opium, which had been promised to the East India Company by the government. The Navy bombarded Canton in January 1841, and 500 Chinese died, with no losses for the British Navy. Sailing ships with massive guns were towed into range by steamships, kinda like on Power Rangers when they all combined together into one massive beast. Perhaps the most dramatic battle of this war was the Battle of Ningpo, fought between a British force that had occupied a town of Ningpo and the relieving army led by the Manchu prince Yi Jing. The British were led by Lieutenant Colonel Morris with 900 troops, and Colonel Duan Yongfu led a force of 5,000 Manchu bannermen to come and relieve the city. The British played a trick on the Chinese here, where they pretended as if they'd already left the city and had sailed off to some other part of the coast to raid another port. They showed no sign that they had occupied it and left the gates open. So when this army turned up, they walked straight into the city, assuming that they were just going to kind of resupply and then leave to the next town that had been attacked or something like that, or perhaps just hold the town. But actually, the British had laid a minefield in the central street, and they walked straight into it. The slaughter was incredible. They then popped up, of course, from the city walls and places like that, and began pouring fire into the Chinese army that was entering the city still. Here I'm going to read an eyewitness account from Lieutenant John Ochterlawny. The effect was terrific, for the street was perfectly straight, and the enemy's rear, not aware of the miserable fate that was being dealt out to their comrades in the front, continued to press the mass forward, so as to force fresh victims upon the mound of dead and dying, which already barricaded the street. The infantry resumed their firing, and such a storm of balls was kept up on the enemy that in a short time the street was choked up, and when, for want of a living mark, the men were ordered to advance, their steps fell upon a closely packed mass of dead and dying. When the Chinese rear realised what was happening and finally a mass rout began, British forces from either sides of the city's walls came out and delivered a deadly crossfire as they tried to retreat from the city's gate. Another officer, Alexander Murray, reports on the reaction of the locals to this massacre happening. I would say the most extraordinary part of the scene was of the coolness with which the country people looked on, crowding the bridges and every spot which they could see well in an amazing manner. The circumstances of their assembly showed that the confidence they had that we would not injure them was great, but the little interest that they showed of their people did not raise them in my estimation. The British then pursued the retreating Chinese army, capturing the nearby city of Suchi on the 15th of March. Then was the Battle of Chapu on the 18th of May. Before the attack, the British commander, Major General Hugh Goh, divided his forces into three, a column of infantry on the left of 863 men, and right 969 men, with artillery in the centre. Goh accompanied the right column, which landed first on May the 16th. The remaining troops moved round to the rear of the enemy, thereby cutting off their communications with Chapu. Meanwhile, the accompanying steamers began a bombardment of the city's defences. The enemy were completely taken by surprise, as usual. They were unprepared for anything except a frontal attack.
They gave way on all sides and took to flight, with the exception of a body of some 300 Tartar troops who seized a small Joss house and held it with an indomitable pluck and perseverance.
The British did not remain in Chapu long. They captured the city's ordnance and destroyed its arsenals before moving on to attack Wusong. Something slightly ghastly about this battle is that when news of this defeat reached a Manchu commander at Shenyang, a mass suicide was committed by the Manchus, while the Han Chinese discussed the situation with the British. The Han are the more kind of native ethnic group in China. They're kind of the majority ethnic group. And the Han dynasty is the dynasty that actually existed at the time of the Romans, to put that into perspective. So the Manchus at the minute are a people from the north of China's kind of sphere of influence that have came in and taken power. When hostilities ceased, Chinese official Yilibu returned 16 captured British soldiers to Go in recognition of his courtesy in releasing the Chinese captured at Chapu, it says, quoted here. Perhaps this ethnic difference is why the Chinese didn't seem to care when this massacre happened at Ningpo. It just kind of reminded me of that. Perhaps they were tired of the flippin' Manchus running the show, and they wanted the Han Chinese to be back at the helm of their own destiny. Just a thought there. So anyway, the final results of this Battle of Chapu was the British had 2,220 land troops and 8 ships. The Chinese had 8,000 to 10,000 bannermen. The British lost 13 men and 42 wounded, and the Chinese lost about just over 1,000, maybe up to 1.5 thousand, and 14 junks were captured, which are the name of their ships, junks, which is kind of fitting at the minute because they're pretty obsolete at this point, I think. So now the second phase of the war commenced with the Yangtze River campaign. Most of the Chinese ports were now blocked or under British occupation, so Go sought to cripple the finances of the Qing Empire by striking up the Yangtze River. 25 warships and 10,000 men were assembled in Ningpo and at Chapu in May for a planned advance into the interior. They sailed up the Yangtze and captured the Emperor's tax barges, a devastating blow that slashed the revenue of the imperial court in Beijing to just a fraction of what it had been, so a massive disaster there, completely. On the 14th of June, the mouth of the Huangpu River was captured by the British fleet. On the 16th of June, the Battle of Wusong occurred, after which the British captured the towns of Wusong and Baoshan. The undefeated outskirts of Shanghai were occupied by the British on the 19th of June. The fall of Shanghai left the vital city of Nanking, known as Jianjing under the Qing, vulnerable. The Qing had amassed an army of 56,000 Manchu bannermen and Han Green Standards to defend Linjiang province, and had strengthened their river defences on the Yangtze. However, by May 1842, a British naval activity in northern China had led to resources and manpower being withdrawn to defend Beijing. The Qing commander in the province released 16 British prisoners in the hope that a ceasefire could be reached, but poor communications, yet again, led both the Qing government and the British to reject any overtures of peace. In secret, the Zhaoguang Emperor did consider signing a peace treaty with the British, but only in regards to the Yangtze River, and not the war as a whole. Had it been signed, Britain would have been paid to not enter the Yangtze. On the 14th of July, the British fleet on the Yangtze began to sail up the river. Reconnaissance had alerted Go to the logistical importance of the city of Zhenjiang. The plans were made to capture it. Most of the city's guns had been relocated to Wusong and had been captured by the British when said city had been taken. The Qing commanders inside the city were disorganized, with Chinese sources stating that over 100 traitors were executed in Shenyang before the battle. The British fleet arrived off the city in the morning of the 21st of July. The Chinese initially retreated from the city into the surrounding hills, causing a premature British landing. Fighting soon erupted though, beginning the Battle of Xinjiang. In this battle, the Chinese were actually outnumbered with a force of Manchu and Mongol bannermen, and the British soldiers blew open the western gate of the city and stormed in, where fierce street fighting ensued. Shenyang was devastated by the battle, with many Chinese soldiers and their families committing suicide rather than being taken prisoner, and this was particularly the Manchus again. Seems like it's a bit of a tradition in their culture or something, like when a Roman general falls on his sword. This kind of thing. Like a part of the code of honour perhaps, like the samurai as well. The British suffered their highest combat losses of the war taking this city, and that was 100 losses there. So they're still going about 10 to 1 in terms of KD ratio. This capturing of Shenyang means that the British fleet can cut off the vital Grand Canal, which paralyses the Chaoyun system, which is basically like a advanced infrastructure that the Chinese had in place for redistributing grain specifically, but it also helped them to move troops and other supplies around their empire as well. A system of different canals and roads that are kind of designed to be as efficient as possible, essentially. And this was actually built in 200 BC, which is incredible. Some highly advanced infrastructure that they've had for donkey's years. And it's kind of sad, but also kind of impressive to see this this kind of weak point of the empire specifically targeted like this to bring it to its knees, but that is what actually happened. The British were in a position to assault the city of Nanking, but a delegation from Nanking met with the British, and on the 21st of August, the Daoguang Emperor authorised his diplomats to sign a peace treaty with the British. The First Opium War finally ended on the 29th of August 1842 with the signing of the Treaty of Nanking. This document was signed by the officials of the British and the Qing empires on board the HMS Cornwallis.